Before we dive into today's story, I want you to know something. This isn't just about Christmas dinner. This is about recognizing when people mistake your kindness for weakness, when they think your love makes you powerless. If you've ever been betrayed by the people you trusted most, if you've ever had your generosity thrown back in your face, this story will speak to your soul. And if anyone has ever told you that forgiveness is the only path forward, well, sometimes justice serves a better meal than turning the other cheek. So settle in with your favorite drink, because you're about to witness what happens when someone underestimates a woman who's built an empire with her own hands. This is Leanne's story, and trust me, the ending will leave you breathless. But first, if you're new to her real stories, welcome to the channel where we celebrate women who refuse to be victims. Hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, because these are the stories that will change how you see the world. Now, let's begin. My name is Leanne Moriarty, and at 59, I have learned that the most devastating betrayals come wrapped in the pretty paper of family tradition. I stood in my dining room on Christmas Eve, adjusting the placement of my grandmother's crystal stemware for the third time. The Waterford glasses caught the light from the chandelier my late mother had bought in Dublin 40 years ago, casting tiny rainbows across the mahogany table that could seat 12, but tonight was set for 3. 3. Such a small number, yet it had taken me weeks to plan this evening. The menu was deliberate. Roasted duck with orange glaze because it was my son David's favorite, truffle mashed potatoes that my daughter-in-law Claire had raved about last year, and my signature chocolate souffle that had been the crown jewel of our family celebration since David was 7 years old. I'd spent the morning arranging white roses and holly, the afternoon preparing sauces from scratch, and the early evening selecting the perfect wine from the cellar I'd been curating for 25 years. My long gray hair was swept into an elegant chignon, secured with the pearl pins David had given me for my last birthday. I wore my midnight blue silk dress, the one that made my eyes look almost violet, and my grandmother's 3-strand pearl necklace, the one David's father had tried to claim in our divorce 20 years ago. The one I'd fought for not because of its monetary value, but because it represented unbroken feminine legacy in a world where men thought they could simply take what women had built. I checked my reflection in the antique mirror above the sideboard. At 59, I was still beautiful, still commanding, still the kind of woman who turned heads when she entered a room. My skin was porcelain smooth, my figure maintained through years of Pilates and careful eating, my bearing regal enough that strangers often assumed I was someone important before they knew my name. They were right to assume that. I was important. I had made myself important. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimed 7:30. David and Claire were expected at 8, which meant they would arrive at 8:15 because Claire had never mastered the art of punctuality despite 3 years of marriage to my son. I used the extra time to light the candles, not the electric ones that so many people use these days, but real beeswax tapers that filled the air with a scent of honey and warmth. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. At 8:45, my phone buzzed. "Mom?" David's voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize over his 34 years, the voice he used when he was about to disappoint me but wanted to pretend it wasn't his fault. "Hello, sweetheart. Are you running late? Traffic must be terrible tonight. Actually, Mom, about dinner?" He paused, and I heard Claire's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. "We're not going to be able to make it." I set down the silver serving spoon I'd been polishing and looked around my perfect dining room, the table set for 3, the duck resting under a warming dome, the soufflé batter ready to be folded and baked, the candles casting dancing shadows on walls lined with family photographs spanning 4 generations. "Not going to make it," I repeated carefully. "Something came up. Last minute. We're really sorry, but—" "What came up, David?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Well, Stephanie called and—" Stephanie. His father's wife. The woman my ex-husband had been sleeping with for 2 years before I discovered their affair. The woman who had destroyed my marriage and then had the audacity to send me a Christmas card every year signed, with warm wishes from the new Mrs. Hale. Stephanie called, I said. She invited us for dinner. Christmas Eve dinner. And Dad's getting older, and she thought it would be nice for the family to be together and… I see. Mom, we can do Christmas another day. Maybe this weekend? Or New Year's. We could. David, I interrupted, my voice still perfectly pleasant, perfectly controlled. Are you telling me that you're choosing to spend Christmas Eve with your father's wife instead of your mother? It's not like that, Mom. It's just, after I've spent 3 days preparing your favorite meal? We didn't know you were making such a big production. A big production. I looked again at my dining room, at the evidence of my love made manifest in china and crystal and carefully prepared food. I see. Mom, don't be like this. You're making it weird. Making it weird. 20 years of being the only parent who showed up to his soccer games, his graduation, his wedding planning meetings because his father was too busy with his new life. 20 years of holiday traditions and birthday celebrations and family dinners where I was the constant, reliable center of his world. And I was making it weird by expecting him to honor a Christmas Eve invitation I'd extended 6 weeks ago. I'm not making anything weird, David. I'm simply clarifying the situation. We'll make it up to you. There's no need to make anything up. You've made your choice very clear. Mom, have a lovely evening, sweetheart. Give my regards to Stephanie. I hung up before he could respond. For exactly 30 seconds, I stood in my perfect dining room and felt the full weight of the betrayal settle into my bones. Not just David's betrayal, but the echo of his father's betrayal 20 years ago. The pattern repeating itself like a virus passed from generation to generation. Then I walked to my bar cart, a 1920s piece I'd inherited from my mother, and poured myself 3 fingers of the Macallan 25 that I'd been saving for a special occasion. I raised the glass in a toast to my empty dining room. To family loyalty, I said aloud, my voice echoing off the walls. And to understanding exactly where one stands. I drank the whiskey slowly, savoring the burn. Then I walked to my study, sat down at my antique writing desk, and pulled out my leather-bound address book. I turned to the page marked L and found the entry I was looking for. Jonathan Latham, attorney at law. The man who had handled my divorce with such surgical precision that my ex-husband still flinched when he saw legal envelopes in his mailbox. It was Christmas Eve, but Jonathan owed me more favors than either of us could count. And some conversations were too important to wait for business hours. As I dialed his number, I caught my reflection in the darkened window of my study. I looked exactly the same as I had an hour ago, perfectly composed, elegantly dressed, radiantly beautiful. But something fundamental had shifted behind my eyes. David had just reminded me of a lesson I'd learned 20 years ago and apparently forgotten. When people show you who they are, believe them the first time. More importantly, when they show you that they're willing to betray you, show them exactly what betrayal costs. Jonathan, I need to see you this week. Not immediately. I understand the holidays are sacred. But I need comprehensive estate planning advice, and I need it to be completely confidential. What kind of timeline are we looking at? I want to explore all my options thoroughly. This isn't a decision I'm making in anger. It's a decision I'm making with complete clarity about my son's priorities. I can see you December 28th. That gives you a few days to be certain about whatever direction you want to take. Perfect. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. And if this story is resonating with you so far, hit that like button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Your stories matter to me, and they might inspire our next video. I didn't sleep that Christmas Eve night. Instead, I sat in my study until dawn, surrounded by photo albums and documents, reconstructing the architecture of my betrayal. 20 years ago, I had been a different woman. Softer, more trusting, married to David's father, William, for 15 years and believing we were building something permanent together. I was 39 then, still young enough to think that love conquered all, that marriage vows meant something sacred, that the father of my child would never look me in the eye and lie about where he'd been spending his evenings. The photos from that era told the story of my innocence. Here I was at David's 8th birthday party, radiant in a yellow sundress, William's arm around my waist as we watched our son blow out his candles. Here we were at a charity gala, me in emerald silk, William in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, looking for all the world like the golden couple everyone envied. I remembered that night, the gala for the children's hospital that I'd spent months organizing. The success I'd felt when we exceeded our fundraising goal by 30%. The way William had whispered in my ear during the auction, telling me how proud he was of my work, how lucky he was to have married such an extraordinary woman. 2 weeks later, I discovered he'd been sleeping with Stephanie for 8 months. The betrayal hadn't been quick or merciful. It had been a slow, calculated dismantling of everything I'd believed about my life. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Business trips that seemed to multiply mysteriously. Evenings when he came home late, smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, with explanations that grew increasingly elaborate and increasingly implausible. The worst part wasn't the infidelity itself. It was the way he'd made me complicit in my own deception. How he'd look me in the eye and called me paranoid when I asked about the strange charges on our credit card. How he'd suggested I was becoming emotionally unstable when I questioned his absences. How he'd actually convinced me to see a therapist for my trust issues while he was falling in love with another woman. The divorce had been vicious. William had assumed that because I'd been a devoted wife and mother, I would be a pushover in legal proceedings. He'd been catastrophically wrong. I had spent our entire marriage managing our social connections, our financial investments, our real estate portfolio. While he'd been focused on his medical practice, I'd been building something larger, a network, a reputation, a fortune that existed independently of his income. When it came time to divide our assets, his lawyers discovered that the woman they dismissed as a housewife had actually been the architect of most of their family's wealth. I'd walked away with a house, 60% of our financial assets, and full custody of David. William had gotten his freedom and Stephanie. At the time, I'd thought I'd won. Looking at those photos now, I realized I'd won the wrong war. Because while I'd been fighting for financial security, William had been quietly turning my son against me. Not obviously. William was too sophisticated for that. But subtly, systematically, he'd begun planting seeds of doubt about my character, my motivations, my love for David. The evidence was all there in the photographs if you knew how to look for it. Here was David at 15, visiting his father's new house for the first time, his smile bright and genuine as Stephanie showed him the pool she'd had installed, just for him. Here he was at 17, looking uncomfortable at my birthday dinner while telling me about the college fund his father and Stephanie had set up for him. Here he was at 21, explaining why he couldn't spend Thanksgiving with me because Stephanie was hosting her family and it would be awkward if he wasn't there. 20 years of careful manipulation. 20 years of another woman gradually positioning herself as the more reasonable parent, the more understanding stepmother, the family member who created joy while I created complications. And I had let it happen because I'd been so focused on being the better person that I'd forgotten to protect what mattered most. The final photo in the album was from David's wedding 3 years ago. I was there, of course, in my mother-of-the-groom champagne silk, smiling as my son married Claire in a ceremony that Stephanie had somehow ended up planning despite my offers to help. William and Stephanie sat in the front row on the groom's side, beaming like proud parents, while I sat alone on my side, beautiful and dignified and utterly isolated. That should have been my warning. That should have been the moment I recognized the pattern completing itself. Instead, I convinced myself that marriage would change things. That Claire would want to build a relationship with her mother-in-law. That becoming a wife would make David more appreciative of family bonds. That somehow, the love I'd poured into raising him would finally be returned with interest. Last night had proven how naive that hope had been. As Christmas morning light filtered through my study windows, I closed the photo albums and opened the financial documents I'd been avoiding. My portfolio, my real estate holdings, my business investments, all the wealth I'd accumulated through 2 decades of careful planning and strategic thinking. On paper, I was worth approximately $12 million. The house alone was valued at $3.8 million. My investment portfolio was worth another $4 million. The remaining assets were spread across commercial real estate, art, jewelry, and various business ventures that had proven more lucrative than even I had anticipated. All of it currently designated to pass to David upon my death. All of it about to change. I picked up my phone and called Jonathan again. "Merry Christmas, Leanne," he answered. "I assume you haven't changed your mind about our meeting?" "I've become more committed to it, actually. Can you be here by noon?" "That urgent?" "Jonathan, my son chose to spend Christmas Eve with his father's wife instead of his mother. After I spent 3 days preparing his favorite meal. After I invited them 6 weeks ago. After 20 years of putting him first in every decision I've made." "I see. Do you?" "Because I'm not sure I did, until last night." "What exactly are you thinking, Leanne?" "I'm thinking that it's time David learned about consequences. Real consequences. The kind that can't be undone with apologies or explanations or promises to make it up to me later." "How final do you want these consequences to be?" I looked around my study, at the portraits of my grandmother and mother who had built the foundation of our family's wealth, at the awards I'd won for my charitable work, at the evidence of a life spent creating value and meaning for other people. Completely final, Jonathan. I want him disinherited entirely. Not reduced inheritance, no inheritance. I want to erase him from my will as thoroughly as he's erased me from his priorities. That's comprehensive. And I want him to know about it. Not after I'm dead, when it's academic. Now, while he's alive to understand exactly what his choices have cost him. Leanne, are you sure you want to? Jonathan, I have never been more sure of anything in my life. Because the truth was, I should have done this 20 years ago. I should have recognized that William's betrayal wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. And patterns, once established, tend to repeat themselves across generations unless someone has the courage to break them. David had just shown me that he was his father's son in every way that mattered. And I was about to show him that I was my mother's daughter, a woman who didn't make threats she couldn't keep or promises she couldn't deliver. The game had changed last night. It was time David learned the new rules. Jonathan arrived at my house precisely at noon on December 28th, carrying his leather briefcase and wearing the expression he reserved for our most delicate legal maneuvers. Over the years, we developed a professional relationship that bordered on artistic collaboration. He provided the legal framework, I provided the creative vision, and together we crafted solutions that left our targets wondering what had hit them long after the damage was done. "You look remarkably composed for someone planning a legal revolution," he said as I led him into my study. "I've had time to think. This isn't about revenge. It's about aligning my estate planning with reality." We spent 3 hours discussing my options, and I have to admit, Watching Jonathan work was like watching a master painter create a portrait. Every clause was deliberately chosen, every provision carefully calibrated to achieve maximum impact with minimum legal vulnerability. Now, Leanne, he said carefully, I need to address some legal complexities. David is your biological son, and while you have significant discretion in estate planning, completely disinheriting children can sometimes be challenged successfully. What would make such a challenge unsuccessful? Clear documentation of your reasoning, evidence of your mental competency, and what we call nominal inheritance, leaving him something small but meaningful that shows you didn't simply forget him. What kind of nominal inheritance? Personal items with sentimental but not financial value. A few $1,000s. Enough to show intentionality rather than oversight. This was more nuanced than I'd initially planned, but it was also more bulletproof. And Claire's potential claims as a spouse? More complex. During marriage, there can be expectations of community property rights depending on state law. However, since these assets predate their marriage and were never legally transferred to David, her claims would be limited. We crafted a document that was both legally sophisticated and emotionally devastating. David would inherit exactly $5,000 and his father's watch, enough to show I hadn't forgotten him, not enough to matter financially. The rest of my estate would be divided among carefully selected charities, educational trusts, and Miranda, who would receive the bulk of the assets. The timing element is crucial, Jonathan explained as we reviewed the final draft. If you want maximum psychological impact, the revelation should come after he's had time to assume everything is back to normal, but before he starts making financial plans based on expected inheritance. How long for execution? With proper procedures and waiting periods? About 3 weeks, which means early January for final documents. Perfect. That gives him time to enjoy the holidays before reality sets in. And you're certain you want to deliver this personally rather than through legal channels? I considered this. There was something appealing about the formal approach, a certified letter arriving with official seals and legal language. But that lacked the personal touch this situation deserved. I think a personal delivery would be more meaningful. In that case, might I suggest a particular presentation approach? Jonathan reached into his briefcase and withdrew an elegant burgundy portfolio, the kind used for presenting important documents to high-value clients. Sophisticated, understated, the sort of thing that implies significance before they even open it. You're an artist, Jonathan. I prefer craftsmen, but I appreciate the sentiment. After he left, I spent the rest of Christmas Day in my study, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in months. There's something uniquely satisfying about decisive action after a period of uncertainty. For too long, I'd been reacting to David's choices, accommodating his schedule, adjusting my expectations to match his availability. Now I was making choices. And my choices would have consequences that lasted longer than his momentary convenience. Monday arrived with the unseasonable warmth that sometimes graces the Pacific Northwest in late December. I was in my garden, deadheading the winter roses that somehow continued blooming despite the season, when my phone rang. Mom, David's voice carried that particular tone again, not quite apologetic, but aware that some form of emotional management might be required. Good morning, sweetheart. How was your Christmas? It was great, actually. Stephanie made this incredible prime rib, and her sister's kids were there, so the house was full of energy. Very festive. How wonderful for you. Yeah, and Mom, about Christmas Eve. I know you were disappointed, but I was thinking we could do our celebration this weekend. Maybe Saturday? Claire's been wanting to try that new place downtown, the one with the chef who trained in France. I paused in my gardening, my hand still wrapped around the stem of a particularly stubborn rose. Saturday, I repeated. If that works for you. I know it's not the same as Christmas Eve, but... David, what made you think I would still want to have a Christmas celebration? Silence on the other end of the line. What do you mean? I mean, Christmas was December 24th. That was Christmas. You chose to spend it elsewhere. But Mom, we can still. Can we? Because it seems to me that when you made your choice last week, you were very clear about your priorities. I'm simply respecting those priorities. You're being ridiculous. It was one dinner. Ridiculous. The same word his father had used when I'd questioned the mysterious credit card charges. The same dismissive tone that suggested my feelings were excessive, unreasonable, something to be managed rather than respected. You may be right, I said pleasantly. Perhaps I am being ridiculous. But David, I want you to understand something very clearly. What? Actions have consequences. Not just the consequences you intend, but the consequences that naturally follow from the choices you make. Mom, you're being dramatic. I'm being honest. Something I should have done more often over the years. What's that supposed to mean? It means that when you choose to prioritize other people over your mother, you should be prepared for your mother to prioritize other people over you. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining cause and effect. It's a very simple concept. Another long pause.
Fine.
If that's how you want to be about it. It's not about what I want, David. It's about what you've chosen. Whatever, Mom. Call me when you're ready to be reasonable. He hung up. I continued pruning my roses, feeling oddly peaceful. The conversation had gone exactly as I'd expected, David attempting to control the narrative, to position himself as the reasonable party being victimized by his mother's emotional overreaction. It was a strategy that had worked for him in the past, partly because I'd allowed it to work. No longer. Tuesday brought a text from Claire. Hi, Leanne. Hope you had a lovely Christmas. David said you were upset about Christmas Eve, but I'm sure we can work something out. Maybe lunch this week? Hugs and kisses. I read the message 3 times, marveling at its calculated casualness. The assumption that my feelings could be worked out over lunch. The implication that this was a minor misunderstanding rather than a fundamental revelation about our relationship. The kiss-kiss-kiss sign-off that suggested an intimacy we'd never actually shared. I didn't respond. Wednesday brought a phone call from David that I didn't answer. Thursday brought another text from Claire, this one slightly less cheerful. Leanne, I feel like there's been a miscommunication.
Can we talk?
Friday brought silence, which I interpreted as David and Claire finally beginning to understand that this situation might not resolve as easily as they'd assumed. Saturday brought Jonathan's call. The documents are ready, he said. Signed, sealed, and legally bulletproof. Excellent. I'll pick them up this afternoon. Leanne. Yes. You might want to prepare yourself for the fallout from this. Once David sees these papers, there's no going back. Jonathan, there was no going back the moment my son chose to betray me for his father's wife. I'm simply making the consequences visible. That evening, I dressed with particular care. Black wool slacks, cream silk blouse, my grandmother's pearls, and the Hermes scarf David had given me for my birthday 2 years ago. I wanted to look like exactly what I was. A woman of substance, elegance, and unshakable resolve. The burgundy portfolio sat on my passenger seat as I drove across town to David and Claire's neighborhood. It was a lovely area, not as prestigious as mine, but respectable, expensive, full of young professional couples who thought they were building something permanent. I parked outside their contemporary colonial and walked to the front door with the portfolio tucked under my arm. Through the large front windows, I could see them in their living room. David on the couch with his laptop, Claire curled beside him with a glass of wine, both of them looking relaxed and content in their beautiful home. It was 7:30 p.m. Time for the second act to begin. I rang the doorbell and waited, my heart beating steadily, my expression serene. When David opened the door, I could see the wariness in his eyes, but also relief that I was apparently ready to be reasonable.
Mom.
This is a surprise. Hello, darling. I brought you something. David stepped back to let me enter, and I could see Claire rising from the couch, smoothing her hair and attempting to arrange her features into an expression of welcoming concern. Leanne, she said, moving toward me with her arms extended for an air-kiss greeting. I'm so glad you came by. I've been worried about this silly misunderstanding. Silly misunderstanding. As if 20 years of single motherhood and 3 days of Christmas preparation could be reduced to a silly misunderstanding. Hello, Claire. You look lovely as always. Their living room was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture arranged with the help of a professional decorator, abstract art that had been chosen for its color coordination rather than its meaning, fresh flowers that were changed weekly by a service. Everything beautiful, everything correct, everything lacking the weight of genuine history or personal significance. Can I get you something to drink? David asked, playing the role of the gracious host.
Wine?
Coffee. No, thank you. I won't be staying long. I settled into the chair across from their sofa, placing the burgundy portfolio on the glass coffee table between us. Both David and Claire's eyes went to it immediately. I wanted to bring you something, I continued, my voice pleasant and conversational. A Christmas gift, you might say. Mom, about Christmas Eve. David began, but I held up a gentle hand. Oh, darling, there's no need to discuss that again. I understand your choice completely. You do. Claire sounded surprised and relieved. Absolutely. In fact, your choice helped me clarify some things I'd been thinking about for quite some time. I reached for the portfolio and opened it with deliberate care, revealing the documents inside. The legal paper was cream-colored, elegant, substantial enough to convey importance. You see, I've been considering my legacy lately. What I want to leave behind, and to whom. David's expression shifted slightly, some primitive instinct warning him that this conversation was not headed in the direction he'd anticipated. Your legacy? Claire asked. My estate. My will. The disposition of my assets after I'm gone. I lifted the top document from the portfolio. I realized that my current will was terribly outdated. Written at a time when I had different priorities, different understanding of family loyalty. Mom, David said carefully, what are you talking about? I'm talking about clarity, darling. About ensuring that my wealth goes to people who actually value family relationships. I handed him the document. This is my new will, executed yesterday and properly notarized. I thought you should see it. David took the papers with hands that weren't quite steady. Claire moved closer to him on the couch, reading over his shoulder. I watched their faces as they processed the legal language, as understanding dawned slowly, and then all at once. The silence in the room was profound. You. David's voice came out as barely a whisper. You disinherited me? I updated my will to reflect current realities. I corrected gently. You've made it very clear that I'm not a priority in your life. I'm simply returning the favor. This is insane, Claire burst out. You can't cut David out of your will because of one dinner. You're quite wrong about that, I replied, my tone still perfectly pleasant. I can distribute my assets however I choose. And I choose to leave them to people who demonstrate genuine care for family relationships. Who? David asked, his face white with shock. Miranda, primarily. My sister's daughter. The one who visits me twice a year and calls every week to check on my health. The one who remembered my birthday this year without prompting. I smiled warmly. She's such a thoughtful girl. Always has been. Miranda? My sister's daughter, the secondary beneficiary of my new will. I hadn't seen her since my birthday dinner 8 months ago, but she'd been a constant presence in my life, calling monthly, visiting twice yearly, remembering every important date without prompting. Miranda, your cousin, the one who actually maintains family relationships. I barely know Miranda. And whose fault is that? She's lived in Portland for 6 years. She's called you every Christmas and birthday for the past decade, and she attended your wedding even though you forgot to invite her to your engagement party. David looked genuinely confused, as if he'd never considered that family relationships required mutual effort. She's family too, David. The difference is she acts like it. Claire was scanning the document frantically, her face growing paler with each page. This says, Claire was scanning the document frantically, her face growing paler with each page. This says almost everything goes to charity and Miranda, and David gets $5,000 and a watch. Not everything, I corrected. There are several meaningful personal items designated for David. But yes, the bulk of the estate goes to people and organizations that demonstrate genuine appreciation for family relationships and social responsibility. $5,000? David stared at me as if I'd grown a second head. That's it. That's more than many people leave to children who disappoint them. I'm not cutting you out entirely. I'm simply acknowledging that our relationship isn't worth $12 million. You can't do this, David said, his voice rising. I'm your son. Yes, you are. And as my son, you had certain privileges and opportunities. You chose to squander them. I chose to have dinner with my father. You chose to abandon your mother on Christmas Eve for the woman who destroyed my marriage. You chose to prioritize the comfort of your father's wife over the feelings of the woman who raised you alone for 20 years. That's not what happened. That's exactly what happened, David. And now you're experiencing the consequences of that choice. I stood up, smoothing my slacks and checking my watch. I should go. I'm sure you'll want time to process this information. Mom, wait. David scrambled to his feet.
We can talk about this.
We can work something out. Work something out? I turned to face him, and for the first time, I let some of my true feelings show in my voice. David, do you understand what you've done? Do you comprehend the magnitude of what you threw away for one evening of convenience? It was just dinner. It was everything. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, but I didn't regret them. It was 20 years of putting you first, 20 years of sacrifice and love and unwavering support, reduced to something you could abandon at the last minute for a woman who helped destroy our family. Stephanie didn't destroy anything. Stephanie destroyed my marriage. She stole your father, and now she's stolen you, and you're too blinded by your need for their approval to see what you've lost. The room fell silent except for the sound of our breathing. David stood frozen, the will still clutched in his hands, his face a mask of shock and dawning understanding. This isn't about Stephanie, he said finally. This is about Dad. You're still angry about the divorce, and you're taking it out on me.
No, David.
This is about you. This is about your choice to side with the people who betrayed me, and my choice to stop pretending that doesn't matter. You're being cruel. I'm being honest. For the first time in years, I'm being completely, brutally honest. Claire, who had been silent during this exchange, suddenly found her voice. Leanne, I think you're having some kind of breakdown. This isn't rational. I turned my attention to her, and I could see her shrink back slightly from whatever she saw in my expression. Claire, let me be very clear about something. This decision is the most rational thing I've done in years. I spent 2 decades enabling David's selfishness, excusing his priorities, accommodating his convenience. I told myself it was love, but it was actually cowardice. Cowardice. The cowardice of a woman who was afraid to demand the respect she deserved, who was afraid to set boundaries because she thought unconditional love meant unconditional tolerance. I moved toward the door, then paused and looked back at them. This beautiful young couple in their beautiful house, surrounded by beautiful things that meant nothing. David, I want you to understand something very important. This isn't a negotiation. This isn't a punishment you can reverse with good behavior or improved choices. This is reality. The reality that actions have consequences, and some consequences are permanent. Mom, please. I loved you more than my own life for 34 years. I would have given you anything, done anything, sacrificed anything for your happiness. And you threw it all away for Christmas dinner with Stephanie. I opened the front door and stepped into the crisp December evening. Enjoy the life you've chosen, darling. I hope it's worth what it cost you. I drove home in perfect silence, my hands steady on the wheel, my heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind me, I knew David and Claire were probably arguing, panicking, trying to figure out how to undo what couldn't be undone. But that was no longer my concern. For the first time in 20 years, I was free. Are you feeling that satisfaction right along with Leanne? Sometimes people need to learn that kindness has limits and patience expires. If you've ever had to set a boundary that shocked someone who took your love for granted, drop a comment below. I read every single one. And don't forget to hit that notification bell, because we're just getting started with this story. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I slept better that night than I had in months. There's something profoundly restful about decisive action, about finally aligning your choices with your values instead of constantly adjusting your values to accommodate other people's choices. Sunday morning found me in my garden again, this time planting new bulbs for spring. Daffodils and tulips, crocuses and hyacinths, flowers that would bloom long after this winter of revelation had passed. There's something hopeful about planting bulbs, about investing in beauty you won't see for months, trusting that time and patience will eventually reveal something magnificent. My phone had been ringing intermittently since 7 a.m., but I'd turned off the ringer and left it inside. Whatever David and Claire had to say could wait until I was ready to hear it. At noon, I finally retrieved my phone and scrolled through the messages. 12 missed calls from David, 7 from Claire, and a series of increasingly frantic text messages that told the story of their evolving understanding of the situation. From David, 7:23 a.m. Mom, we need to talk. This is crazy. From Claire, 8:15 a.m. Leanne, please call us. We can work this out. From David, 9:30 a.m. I looked up the laws. You can't just disinherit your children without cause. This won't hold up. From Claire, 10:45 a.m. We consulted with a lawyer friend. He says this kind of thing gets overturned all the time. From David, 11:58 a.m. Mom, I'm coming over. We're going to discuss this like adults. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled in my study to compose my response. After several drafts, I found the tone I was looking for, perfectly polite, completely immovable. David and Claire, I received your messages. I won't be available for visits or phone calls regarding my will. The documents are legal, properly executed, and final. If you wish to contest them, that's your right, but you should understand that legal challenges to clearly stated testamentary wishes rarely succeed, especially when the testator is demonstrably competent and the will is professionally drafted. I suggest you focus your energy on building your own wealth rather than planning to inherit mine. Regards, Mother. I sent the message and turned off my phone entirely. 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. Then rang again. Then began ringing in a pattern that suggested someone was leaning on it continuously. I ignored it. The ringing stopped, but was replaced by loud knocking. Then by David's voice calling through my front door. Mom, I know you're in there. Open the door. I continued reading my book, a fascinating biography of Coco Chanel, a woman who had understood the importance of never letting others dictate her worth. This is ridiculous. David's voice was muffled, but clearly audible. You can't hide from me forever. Actually, I could. It was my house, after all. The knocking stopped, and I heard footsteps on the gravel path that led around to my back garden. Moments later, I saw David's face at my study window, his expression a mix of desperation and fury. I looked up from my book, met his eyes through the glass, and offered him a polite smile. Then I returned to my reading. He knocked on the window. "Mom, this is insane. Let me in." I turned the page of my book without looking up. After 10 more minutes of increasingly frantic window knocking and door trying, David apparently gave up. I heard his car start and pull out of my driveway. I returned to Coco Chanel, who had some very interesting thoughts about the relationship between independence and power. Monday brought a different strategy. Instead of David, I found Claire on my doorstep at 8 a.m., holding a basket of expensive pastries and wearing an expression of carefully composed contrition. "Leanne," she said when I opened the door. "I brought breakfast. I thought we could talk." How thoughtful. But I've already eaten. Maybe coffee then? I feel like there's been a terrible misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Claire. There's been a revelation. About what? About what my son truly values. And about what I should value in return. Leanne, David loves you. We both do. This whole thing has gotten blown out of proportion. I studied her face, still beautiful, still young, still convinced that the right combination of charm and explanation could fix any problem. "Claire, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "In the 3 years you've been married to my son, how many times have you initiated contact with me? Phone calls, visits, invitations, anything that wasn't prompted by a holiday or birthday?" She blinked, clearly not having expected this question. Well, we're both so busy." "How many times, Claire?" "I don't keep track of things like that."
Ido.
The answer is 0. Not once in 3 years have you reached out to me simply because you wanted to maintain a relationship with your mother-in-law. That's not fair. It's completely fair. It's also completely honest. You've never had any interest in a genuine relationship with me. You've only engaged when social expectations required it or when you needed something. That's not true, isn't it? Because here you are now, with pastries and apologies, because suddenly you need something very badly. Her carefully composed expression began to crack. "Leanne, I know you're hurt, but punishing David won't solve anything." "I'm not punishing David. I'm protecting my assets from people who see them as an entitlement rather than a gift." "But he's your son." "Yes, he is. And for 34 years that meant everything to me. Now I'm discovering what it means to him." I closed the door gently but firmly, leaving Claire standing on my front step with her basket of expensive pastries and her carefully rehearsed appeals. Tuesday brought a phone call from William. "Leanne," his voice carried the same tone of forced reasonableness that had once made me question my own sanity. "David told me about this whole situation. I think we need to discuss it." "Hello, William. No, we don't. You're upset about Christmas dinner. I understand that. But destroying David's inheritance because he spent one evening with his father seems excessive. William, let me save you some time. Nothing you say will change my mind. Nothing you do will alter my will. Nothing you think about this situation matters to me in any way. Leanne, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. For the first time in 20 years, I'm being completely reasonable." "You're being vindictive. I'm being protective of my assets, my values, and my self-respect. David is our son. David is your son and Stephanie's stepson and Claire's husband. But he's made it very clear that he's not really my son in any meaningful sense." "That's not true." "William, do you remember what you told me when you asked for the divorce?" Silence. "You said I needed to accept reality. You said I was living in a fantasy if I thought our marriage could survive your relationship with Stephanie. You said I was being dramatic and unrealistic. Leanne. Well, I'm accepting reality now. The reality that my son has chosen to align himself with you and your wife. The reality that I've spent 20 years pretending that didn't hurt me. The reality that unconditional love, when it's taken for granted, becomes worthless. You're making a mistake. The mistake I made was 20 years ago, when I let you convince me that loving someone meant accepting whatever they chose to do to me. I hung up. Wednesday brought a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Claire and David had apparently found an attorney willing to explore options for contesting my will. The letter was full of legal posturing about undue influence and mental competency evaluations and challenges to testamentary capacity. I forwarded it to Jonathan with a brief note. Please respond appropriately. His response arrived within hours, copied to me and the opposing counsel. It was a masterpiece of legal intimidation wrapped in perfectly courteous language. He detailed my extensive business dealings, my recent medical records showing perfect mental health, the lengthy consultation process that had preceded the will's creation, and the ironclad legal structure of the document itself. More importantly, he made it clear that any attempt to contest the will would result in a very public legal battle, complete with detailed testimony about David's relationship choices and family loyalty patterns. He subtly suggested that such publicity might not be in anyone's best interest, particularly young professionals trying to build their reputations in a small city. The threat was elegant, precise, and devastating. Thursday brought silence, which told me that Jonathan's letter had achieved its intended effect. Friday brought an unexpected visitor. I was arranging fresh flowers in my front hall when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a young woman I didn't immediately recognize, mid-20s, professionally dressed, carrying a small gift bag. Mrs. Moriarty, she said when I opened the door.
I'm Miranda.
Your niece. Miranda, my sister's daughter, the primary beneficiary of my new will. I hadn't seen her since my birthday dinner 6 months ago, but she looked exactly as I remembered, thoughtful, genuine, unassuming. Miranda, what a lovely surprise.
Come in, dear.
I hope I'm not intruding. I was in town for a work conference and I wanted to stop by. She handed me the gift bag. I brought you something from Portland, that tea blend you mentioned liking. I opened the bag to find an elegant tin of Earl Grey from the specialty shop I'd mentioned during her last visit. She'd remembered. Not only remembered, but taken the time to find the exact brand and bring it to me. This is so thoughtful. Would you like some tea? I was just about to put the kettle on. We settled in my living room with proper china cups and the good biscuits I kept for special occasions. Miranda told me about her work as a social worker, about the nonprofit she was helping to launch, about her quiet life in Portland with her partner and their rescue dog. Aunt Leanne, she said as we finished our tea, I need to ask you something. Of course, dear. David called me yesterday. He was very upset. He said something about your will. I see. I don't need to know the details, but I want you to know that if you've made changes because you think I need the money, please don't. I'm doing fine on my own. I studied her face, seeing my sister's kindness reflected there, but also a strength that reminded me of myself at her age. Miranda, let me ask you something. When was the last time you spoke to David? Honestly, I don't think we've had a real conversation since my college graduation. Maybe at your birthday dinner, but that was just pleasantries. And yet when he needed something from you, he didn't hesitate to call. I suppose not. But when you're in town for work, you bring me tea and spend an afternoon visiting without wanting anything in return. Your family, Aunt Leanne. That's what family does. Yes, I said softly. That is what family does. We talked for another hour about her work, her dreams, her thoughtful approach to building a meaningful life. When she left, promising to visit again soon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, genuine family warmth that wasn't tinged with calculation or obligation. That evening, I sat in my study writing thank you notes, a lost art that I'd maintained despite its apparent obsolescence. Thank you to the florist who had created such beautiful arrangements for my Christmas table. Thank you to my housekeeper for her exceptional care of my home. Thank you to Jonathan for his legal expertise and discretion. And thank you to David and Claire, in a way they would never understand, for showing me so clearly what my life could look like without the constant accommodation of people who valued my resources more than my presence. The bulbs I'd planted would bloom in spring, creating beauty that existed for its own sake rather than for anyone's approval or inheritance. Just like the rest of my life from now on, the first 2 weeks of January passed in blissful quiet. My phone remained mercifully silent, my doorbell undisturbed, my peace intact. I fill my days with activities that brought me genuine pleasure: reading, gardening, visiting the art museum, having lunch with friends who valued my company rather than my estate planning decisions. It was during one of these lunches with my dear friend Catherine at our favorite French bistro that I learned exactly how David and Claire were handling their new reality. "Darling," Catherine said, lowering her voice to that conspiratorial tone that preceded particularly delicious gossip, "I ran into Claire at the grocery store yesterday. She looked absolutely dreadful. Oh, terrible skin, obviously hadn't been sleeping, and she was buying nothing but frozen dinners and wine. Lots of wine. How unfortunate." She started talking to me about family dynamics and legal advice and something about contested wills. I pretended I had no idea what she was referring to, but honestly, Leanne, the poor girl seemed quite desperate. "Did she now?" She asked if I knew any good attorneys. When I asked what for, she said something about family inheritance disputes and elderly relatives making irrational decisions. I sipped my wine and tried to look appropriately concerned. How odd. Indeed. And then this is the really interesting part. She asked if I thought there was any way to have someone declared mentally incompetent if they were making decisions that hurt their own family. My goodness. I told her that generally speaking, people are allowed to make whatever decisions they want with their own money, rational or otherwise. She did not seem pleased with that information. I imagine not. Catherine leaned closer. "Leanne, is there something going on with David that I should know about?" I considered how much to reveal. Catherine had been my friend for 15 years, had supported me through my divorce, and had never once betrayed a confidence. David made some choices recently that clarified our relationship in ways I hadn't previously understood. What kind of choices? The kind that help a mother understand exactly where she ranks in her son's priorities. Oh dear. Indeed. And I've made some choices of my own in response. "Good for you," Catherine said firmly. "I've always thought you were too accommodating with that boy." "Have you?" "Leanne, you've spent 20 years rearranging your life around David's convenience. Missing opportunities, declining invitations, keeping your schedule flexible in case he needed something. And what has he given you in return?"
I thought about this.
"What do you mean?" "When was the last time David invited you to something? Not a holiday obligation or a birthday duty, but something he genuinely wanted to share with you." I couldn't remember. "When was the last time he called just to see how you were feeling?" I couldn't remember that either. "When was the last time he made any effort to accommodate your schedule, your preferences, your needs?" The silence stretched between us as I realized I had no answer to any of these questions. "Catherine," I said finally, "why have you never mentioned this before?" "Because you weren't ready to hear it. And because a good friend doesn't criticize someone's children unless asked directly." "I'm asking now." She sat back in her chair and regarded me with a kind of honest affection that only comes from decades of friendship. "David has always been selfish, Leanne. Charming, intelligent, successful, but fundamentally selfish. He learned early that you would sacrifice anything for his happiness, and he's taken advantage of that knowledge his entire adult life. You think I enabled him. I think you loved him. But yes, I also think you enabled him. And I think Claire recognized that dynamic and decided to exploit it. How so? She married a man whose mother would do anything for him, which meant she would do anything for her by extension. She was banking on inheriting not just David's charm and success, but also your willingness to prioritize their comfort over your own well-being. I absorbed this, feeling pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. And now they're discovering that unconditional love has limits after all. And they're panicking because they can't figure out how to manipulate someone who's stopped caring about their approval. We finished lunch discussing other topics, but Catherine's words stayed with me as I drove home. Had I really been so blind to David's character? Had I really spent 20 years mistaking his ability to charm me for genuine affection? The answer came that evening when my phone rang with David's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Mom, we need to talk. Hello, David. How are you? How am I? I'm trying to figure out how my mother lost her mind. I see.
Do you?
Because I've been talking to people, Mom. Friends, colleagues, other attorneys. And everyone thinks you've had some kind of breakdown. How interesting. What kind of breakdown? The kind where a successful, intelligent woman suddenly makes irrational decisions that hurt her own family. Irrational. Yes, irrational. What rational person disinherits their only child over one missed dinner? David, let me ask you something. Do you think I'm mentally competent? What? It's a simple question. Do you believe I have the mental capacity to understand my own decisions and their consequences? Of course, but... And do you believe I have the legal right to distribute my assets however I choose? Legally, yes, but morally. Thank you. Then we agree that I'm competent to make legal decisions about my own property. Mom, this isn't about legal rights. That's exactly what this is about. My legal right to leave my money to people who actually value family relationships. I value our relationship.
Do you?
Because your actions suggest otherwise. One dinner, Mom. You're destroying my future over one dinner. David, I want you to listen very carefully to what you just said. What? You said I'm destroying your future. Not our relationship. Not the family bonds we've built over 34 years. Your future. Your financial future. Silence on the other end of the line. That tells me everything I need to know about what this relationship has meant to you. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. And it's exactly what this has always been about for you, not love, not family, but financial security. You're putting words in my mouth. I'm simply listening to the words that came out of your mouth.
Mom, please.
Can we start over? Can we try to work this out? Start over? David, this isn't a negotiation. This isn't a problem to be solved or a misunderstanding to be cleared up. This is me finally seeing our relationship clearly for the first time in years. What's that supposed to mean? It means that a son who truly loved his mother wouldn't have abandoned her on Christmas Eve. It means that a son who truly valued their relationship wouldn't be calling her mentally incompetent when she made decisions he didn't like. It means that a son who genuinely cared about family bonds would have put in some effort to maintain those bonds before they became financially relevant. I do care. You care about my money, David. You always have. The difference is that now I care about it too. I hung up and turned off my phone. Later that evening, Catherine called on my landlady. Leanne? I wanted to check on you after our conversation today. I'm well, thank you. You sound different. Lighter, somehow. I feel lighter. It's amazing how much energy you save when you stop trying to maintain relationships with people who fundamentally don't want them. And David? David is discovering what life looks like when his mother stops being available for emotional manipulation. How do you feel about that? I considered the question carefully. How did I feel? Free. I said finally. For the first time in 20 years, I feel completely free. Because the truth was, I'd been carrying the weight of David's approval for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to live without it. I'd been so focused on being the mother he wanted that I'd lost sight of being the woman I actually was. Now, sitting in my beautiful home surrounded by things I'd chosen because they brought me joy, I was rediscovering that woman. And she was more interesting, more powerful, and more at peace than I'd remembered. The screaming Catherine had mentioned, the desperate panic, the frantic legal consultations, the social humiliation that was happening across town, in the lives of people who had gambled everything on my willingness to be taken for granted. They had lost that gamble. And I had won something far more valuable than money. I had won myself back. February arrived with unseasonable warmth and an unexpected visitor. I was in my conservatory, repotting orchids and listening to Vivaldi, when my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, knocked on the glass door. "Mrs. Moriarty? There's a young woman here to see you. Says she's your daughter-in-law."
Claire.
I hadn't seen her since the morning she'd appeared on my doorstep with expensive pastries and cheaper manipulations. "Show her in, please." Claire entered the conservatory looking like a different person than the polished young wife I'd come to know. Her usually perfect hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a wrinkled sweater instead of her typical designer ensembles, and her face was makeup-free and puffy from what appeared to be recent crying. "Leanne," she said, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Thank you for seeing me." "Of course, dear. Please sit." She perched on the edge of the wicker chair across from my potting bench, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I wanted to apologize," she began. "For everything. For Christmas Eve, for not appreciating you properly, for treating your love like it was guaranteed. That's very honest of you. David doesn't know I'm here. He'd be furious if he found out." "Why?" "Because he's convinced this is all some kind of game. That if we just wait long enough or find the right argument or prove to you how much we need the money, you'll change your mind. And you don't think that?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I think I never understood what I was throwing away until it was gone. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I spent 3 years treating you like an obligation instead of an opportunity. You're this incredible woman. You built a business, you raised a son alone, you created this beautiful life, and I was so focused on what you could give me that I never bothered to learn who you actually are. I continued working with my orchids, giving her space to continue. My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. Car accident. And I guess I was so angry about that, about losing her before I was ready, that I couldn't let myself get close to another mother figure. Even David's mother. Especially David's mother. Because what if I loved you and lost you too? So, instead you kept me at arm's length. Instead I kept you at arm's length and told myself it was self-protection. But it wasn't protection, it was just waste. She looked up at me, and I could see genuine anguish in her eyes. I wasted 3 years of knowing you. 3 years of having a mother-in-law who actually wanted a relationship with me. Do you know how rare that is? Is it? Most of my friends either hate their mothers-in-law or are terrified of them. But you always tried to include me, to get to know me, to make me feel welcome. And I took it for granted. Why are you telling me this, Claire? Because I need you to know that I understand now. What I lost. What David lost. What we threw away because we were too stupid and selfish to recognize what we had. And because I need you to know that even if you never forgive us, even if you never change your mind about the will, I'm genuinely sorry. Not because I want something from you, but because you deserved better from me. I set down my gardening tools and really looked at her. This was a different Claire than I'd ever seen. Vulnerable, honest, stripped of the calculating charm that had always made me feel like she was performing rather than relating. Claire, can I ask you something? Anything. Why didn't David come with you today? Her face crumpled slightly. Because David still thinks this is about punishment. He thinks you're trying to teach us a lesson, and that if he just holds out long enough, you'll give in and restore his inheritance. But you don't think that. I think you meant every word you said. And I think David is too proud and too scared to admit that he destroyed something that can't be repaired. Scared of what? Scared of admitting that he's his father's son. Scared of facing the fact that he's capable of the same kind of betrayal that destroyed your marriage. I absorbed this, recognizing the truth in her words. How are things between you and David? Terrible, she admitted. He's angry all the time. Angry at you, angry at the situation, angry at me for not being able to fix it. He keeps talking about legal options and family obligations and how you can't just abandon your own son. But you disagree? I think you can absolutely abandon your son if your son abandoned you first. I think that's called consequences. And how do you feel about the consequences? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Terrified. We're both used to having your safety net, even if we never talked about it. The assumption that no matter what happened, no matter how badly we managed our finances or our careers, we'd eventually inherit enough to be secure. And now we have to actually build our own financial future. And honestly, we're not very good at it. We've been living like people who expected to inherit millions, not like people who need to save and invest and plan for retirement. That must be quite an adjustment. It's a disaster. We owe more on the house than it's worth. Our credit cards are maxed out. David's been counting on his inheritance to start his own law firm, but now. She shrugged helplessly. What will you do? I don't know. Sell the house, probably. Move somewhere cheaper. David might have to stay at his current firm instead of striking out on his own. I might have to go back to work full-time instead of freelancing. That doesn't sound like a disaster. That sounds like what most people do. You're right. And maybe that's what we needed, to learn how to live like normal people instead of like trust fund kids waiting for their payout. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sound the gentle bubbling of my fountain and the classical music playing softly in the background. Claire, I said finally, I appreciate you coming here. I appreciate your honesty and your apology and your understanding of the situation. But it doesn't change anything. She nodded, tears starting to fall. I know. I didn't come here to change your mind. I came here to try to salvage whatever respect you might still have for me as a person. You have my respect for coming here today, for being honest about your mistakes and their consequences. Thank you. That means more to me than you know. She stood to leave, then paused. Leanne? For what it's worth, I think David is going to lose more than money because of this. I think he's going to lose himself. And I think he's going to spend the rest of his life wondering what would have happened if he'd just chosen differently that one night. And you? I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the kind of person who deserves the love I was offered and threw away. After she left, I sat among my orchids thinking about redemption and consequences, about the difference between regret and genuine change. Claire's visit had been unexpected, but it had also been illuminating. She understood what they had lost. More importantly, she understood why they had lost it. David apparently still did not. That evening, as if summoned by my thoughts about him, David called. Mom, Claire said she wanted to see you today. She did. What did you two talk about? Many things. She's a very insightful young woman when she chooses to be honest. She had no right to go behind my back. David, she's your wife, not your employee. She has the right to make her own decisions about relationships. Did she change your mind about anything? She helped me understand your marriage better. Meaning I now see why she married you and why you married her. What's that supposed to mean? It means that you found each other at a time when you both valued security over authenticity. And now you're both learning what happens when that security disappears. Security isn't a bad thing to value. It's not. But when it becomes the only thing you value, you lose sight of everything else that makes life meaningful. Like what? Like love. Like family. Like the relationships that are supposed to matter more than money. Our relationship does matter more than money. Then why haven't you called me once in the past month to ask how I'm feeling? Why haven't you visited to see if I need anything? Why haven't you made any effort to repair our relationship that doesn't involve discussing my will? Silence. David, if our relationship mattered more than money to you, you'd be fighting for the relationship. Instead, you're fighting for the inheritance. Do you understand the difference? Yes. Maybe. I don't know. When you figure it out, call me back. I hung up, feeling something I hadn't expected. Pity. Not for the financial consequences David was facing, but for the emotional ones. He was losing more than money. He was losing the ability to understand love that wasn't transactional, relationships that weren't strategic, family bonds that weren't conditional. And unless he found a way to remember who he used to be before entitlement corrupted his character, he was going to spend the rest of his life surrounded by people who valued him for what he could provide rather than who he was. Just like his father had. The pattern was completing itself, and David was too blind to see it happening. But that was no longer my responsibility to fix. Can you feel how David still doesn't get it? Some people have to lose everything before they understand what they actually had. Have you ever watched someone destroy their own relationships because they couldn't stop taking them for granted? Share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes we all need reminders about what really matters. And if you're enjoying this journey with Leanne, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, because we're building to something powerful. March brought the cherry blossoms and what I privately began calling the negotiation season. It started with a letter from David. Not a phone call or a visit, but a formal, handwritten letter delivered by regular mail. The letter was 2 pages long and read like a personal appeal rather than a legal brief. He wrote about his childhood memories, his genuine love for me, and his recognition that he'd made a terrible mistake on Christmas Eve. For the first time since this began, he mentioned how his choice had hurt me rather than focusing solely on how my response had hurt him. It was a step in the right direction, but it was still fundamentally a request for me to change my mind rather than an acceptance of consequences. I filed it with my other important papers and sent a brief response. Thank you for your letter. I appreciate your honesty about your mistake, but my decision stands. Love, Mother. The second week of March brought a different approach. Service. Instead of expensive gifts, David began showing up to help with tasks around my property. He cleaned my gutters without being asked, helped Mrs. Chun with heavy lifting, and spent an entire Saturday helping me reorganize my basement storage. He didn't mention the will during any of these visits. The third week brought what appeared to be genuine relationship attempts. David called twice, not to discuss inheritance, but to ask about my health, to share news about his work, and to invite me to lunch simply because he missed talking to me. These conversations felt different. Less strategic, more authentic. The fourth week brought something unexpected. Therapy. I was having lunch at the country club with Catherine when David appeared at our table. He looked haggard. Thinner than usual, dark circles under his eyes, his usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled. Mom, he said, ignoring Catherine completely. We need to talk. Hello, David. You remember Catherine, don't you? Hi, Catherine, he said dismissively, then turned back to me. Mom, this has gone on long enough. Please sit down. You're making a scene. He sat, but his agitation was visible to everyone in the dining room. Several people were already staring, and I could see the country club manager hovering nearby, clearly debating whether to intervene. David, I said quietly, you're embarrassing yourself. I'm trying to save my family. You're trying to save your inheritance. There's a difference. Why can't those be the same thing? Catherine cleared her throat. Perhaps I should leave you two to discuss this privately. No, David said quickly. Actually, Catherine, maybe you can help. You've known my mother for years. Can you explain to her that she's making a mistake? Catherine looked at him with the same expression she might use for a child having a tantrum in a restaurant. David, your mother is one of the most intelligent, thoughtful women I know. If she's made this decision, I'm quite certain she has excellent reasons. But it's destroying our family, is it?
Catherine asked.
Or is it revealing what your family actually was all along? David stared at her as if she'd slapped him. What's that supposed to mean? It means that healthy families don't fall apart when money gets involved. It means that sons who truly love their mothers don't abandon them on Christmas Eve. And it means that when someone shows you their true priorities, you should believe them. Catherine, David began, but she held up a hand. I've known your mother since before you were married, David. I've watched her center her entire life around your happiness for 20 years. I've watched her turn down invitations, cancel plans, and rearrange her schedule whenever you needed something. And in all that time, I've never once seen you make a similar sacrifice for her. That's not true. When was the last time you visited her without needing something? When was the last time you called just to check on her health? When was the last time you remembered her birthday without being reminded? David's face went pale. That's what I thought. Catherine turned to me. Leanne, darling, I'm going to leave you to finish this conversation. But for what it's worth, I think you're handling this beautifully. She kissed my cheek and left, but not before patting David's shoulder in a way that somehow managed to be both maternal and pitying. David, I said once we were alone, you're making a spectacle of yourself. I don't care. Mom, I can't lose you. I can't lose everything. You're not losing everything. You're losing money that was never yours to begin with. It's not about the money, isn't it? Because every conversation we've had about this has centered on financial consequences, not emotional ones.
I'm scared. Okay.
Is that what you want to hear? I'm terrified that you'll die and the last thing between us will be this war. For the first time since Christmas Eve, I heard something in David's voice that sounded like genuine emotion rather than strategic manipulation. Then stop making it a war, I said gently.
How?
Stop trying to manipulate me into changing my mind. Stop sending lawyers and friends and gifts. Stop treating this like a problem to be solved instead of a consequence to be accepted. But I can't just accept it. Why not? Because. He struggled for words. Because it means I really screwed up. It means I really hurt you. It means I'm really the kind of person who would choose convenience over love. And are you? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. His voice broke slightly. I don't want to be, but maybe I am. This was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months. David, the fact that you can recognize that possibility suggests you might not be entirely lost. What do you mean? I mean that people who are truly selfish don't question their own motives. They don't worry about whether they've hurt people they love. They don't sit in country clubs having emotional breakdowns about their character. So there's hope. There's always hope. But David, hope requires change, not just regret. What kind of change? The kind where you figure out who you want to be when there's no inheritance to inherit. The kind where you build relationships based on love rather than expectation. The kind where you learn to value people for who they are, not what they can give you. And if I do that, if I really change, would you consider?
No.
The word hung between us like a door slamming shut.
No.
The will stands, David, regardless of what you do or don't do going forward.
But why?
If I change, if I become a better person, why wouldn't you want to reward that? Because the moment you start changing in order to get something, you're not really changing at all. You're just getting better at manipulation. That's not. I wouldn't. Wouldn't you? Right now, as we're sitting here, aren't you calculating how much contrition might be enough to restore your inheritance? Aren't you wondering what specific behaviors might convince me to change my mind? His face told me I was right. David, if you become a better person, truly better, not performatively better, that will be its own reward. It will improve your marriage, your relationships, your own sense of self-worth. But it won't change my will. So, there's nothing I can do? There's nothing you can do to get my money. But there's a great deal you can do to become someone worthy of love, respect, and genuine relationship. I don't understand the difference. I know. And that's exactly the problem. We sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of 20 years of misunderstood love settling between us. Mom, David said finally, what if I can't change? What if I really am just like Dad? Then you'll live the same kind of life he's lived. Surrounded by people who want things from you. Married to someone who values your status more than your character. Always wondering if anyone actually loves you or just loves what you can provide. That sounds terrible. It is terrible, but it's also a choice. Every day, you choose whether to be the kind of person who builds genuine relationships or the kind who collects transaction partners. How do I know which kind I am? When is the last time you did something for someone without expecting anything in return? He thought about this for a long time. I can't remember, he admitted. Then you have your answer. But I can learn, right? I can get better at it. You can. But David, you have to want to get better for your own sake, not for mine. You have to want to be worthy of love because being worthy of love feels better than being worthy of money. Does it? What do you think? He looked around the country club dining room, at the wealthy people eating expensive meals and conducting important business, at the evidence of success and status and financial achievement. I don't know, he said honestly. I've never really tried the other way. Then maybe it's time you did. As he left, I felt something I hadn't expected. Maternal pride. Not pride in his choices or his character, but pride in his willingness to question himself, to admit uncertainty, to consider that he might need to fundamentally change who he was. It was the first conversation we'd had in years that felt like it was between two people who actually cared about each other rather than two opponents negotiating a transaction. But it didn't change anything about my will. Because the hardest lesson any parent can teach their child is that love and consequences can coexist, that caring about someone doesn't mean protecting them from the results of their choices. David was going to have to learn how to be worthy of love the hard way, by becoming someone who could love others without calculating what he might get in return. Whether he succeeded or failed was no longer my responsibility. But for the first time in months, I thought he might actually try. December arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem possible. My garden was dormant but peaceful, my house warm and welcoming, my life fuller than it had been in years. I spent the first week of the month addressing Christmas cards, not the obligatory ones I'd sent for decades to people I barely knew, but heartfelt notes to people who had brought genuine joy to my year. Miranda and her partner. Catherine and her husband, Mrs. Chun and her family, my book club friends, the young couple next door who had helped me plant new rose bushes in October. Real relationships, chosen relationships, relationships built on mutual affection rather than familial obligation. For the first time in 20 years, I was planning a Christmas Eve dinner that excited rather than exhausted me. The guest list was small but meaningful. Catherine and her husband James, Miranda and her partner Sarah, who were flying in from Portland, my neighbors the Johnsons, and my friend Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, who had been widowed the previous spring and was dreading her first Christmas alone. 8 people total. The perfect number for conversation, for intimacy, for the kind of celebration that creates memories instead of obligations. I spent 2 weeks planning the menu, choosing wines, selecting music, and preparing my home for people who would appreciate the effort that went into creating beauty. The dining room was decorated with white roses and evergreen branches, the table set with my finest china and crystal, the sideboard laden with courses that each guest would genuinely enjoy. This was what Christmas was supposed to feel like. On Christmas Eve morning, I was arranging flowers when my phone rang. David's number. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hello, David."
Mom.
His voice was different than it had been during our country club conversation, calmer, more thoughtful. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all."
How are you?
"I'm better, I think." "Different." "Different how?" "Claire and I sold the house. We moved into a much smaller place. Something we can actually afford on our salaries without counting on inheritance." "How do you feel about that?" "Terrified, but also relieved, in a way. Like we're finally living in reality instead of some fantasy about our future net worth." "That sounds healthy." "It is. We're also going to counseling. Both couples counseling and individual therapy." "What prompted that?" "Our marriage was falling apart. Turns out that when you remove the safety net of expected wealth, you discover whether you actually like each other or we're just comfortable together. And we're trying to figure out if we can build something real instead of something convenient." I found myself genuinely interested in his answer rather than simply being polite. "Are you making progress?" "Some days." "My therapist says I have what she calls transactional relationship patterns. Apparently, I evaluate all my connections based on what people can do for me rather than who they are as individuals." "What do you think about that assessment?" "I think she's right. I think I learned it from Dad, and I think I've been doing it my whole life without realizing it." This was a level of self-awareness I'd never heard from David before. "What are you doing about it?" "Learning how to value people differently. Learning how to give without keeping score. Learning how to..."
He paused.
"Learning how to love people without calculating what I might get back." "How does that feel?" "Strange."
Scary.
"But also lighter, somehow. Like I've been carrying around this invisible ledger my whole life, and I'm finally allowed to put it down." We talked for another 20 minutes about his therapy, his new job, he'd taken a position with a public interest law firm, and his slowly evolving understanding of what healthy relationships looked like. "Mom," he said as our conversation wound down, "I want you to know that I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm not trying to change your mind about the will. I wanted you to know that I'm trying to become the kind of person who deserves love rather than the kind who demands it." That's a beautiful goal, David. I may not succeed. This is hard work, and I have 34 years of bad habits to undo. But I wanted you to know I'm trying. I'm proud of you for trying. Really? Really? It takes courage to admit that you need to change fundamentally. Most people never develop that kind of self-awareness. Thank you. That means a lot to me. David. Yes. What are you doing for Christmas? Claire and I are volunteering at a homeless shelter, serving dinner to people who don't have families to go home to. That sounds meaningful. I hope so. My therapist suggested it might help me understand what it means to give without expecting anything in return. And what do you think? I think it's the first Christmas plan I've made in years that isn't centered around what I might receive. After we hung up, I sat in my conservatory thinking about redemption and growth, about the difference between changing because you want something and changing because you want to become someone different. David was finally walking the path I'd hoped he would find, but he was walking it for himself rather than for me. That made all the difference. That evening, my guests arrived precisely at 7, each bringing the kind of thoughtful gifts that reflected actual knowledge of my preferences. Catherine brought homemade preserves from her garden. Miranda and Sarah brought a beautiful plant cutting from their Portland greenhouse. The Johnsons brought a bottle of wine from a small vineyard they'd discovered during their recent travels.
Dr.
Hartwell arrived last. carrying a small wrapped package and looking both nervous and grateful. "Leanne," she said as I took her coat, "I can't tell you how much this invitation means to me. I was dreading tonight. It means a great deal to me that you're here, Elizabeth. The evening wouldn't be complete without you. The dinner was everything I'd hoped it would be." Conversation flowed easily between topics both serious and lighthearted. Everyone contributed to the discussion. Everyone listened to others. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. This was what family felt like when it was chosen rather than imposed. As we finished dessert, Catherine raised her glass. "I'd like to propose a toast to Leanne, who has reminded all of us this year that it's never too late to choose the life you actually want." "To Leanne," everyone echoed, and I felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine. "Thank you," I said, "but I'd like to propose a toast of my own. To all of you, for showing me what it means to be surrounded by people who value presence over presence, who choose to be here rather than feeling obligated to be here." "To chosen family," Miranda added, and we drank to that as well. Later, as I was cleaning up with Catherine's help while the others relaxed by the fire, she asked the question I'd been expecting. "Any word from David today?" "Actually, yes. He called this morning. And I think he might actually be changing. Not to get something from me, but to become someone better." "How do you feel about that?"
Proud.
"Hopeful. And completely unchanged in my resolve about the will."
Good.
The money was never really the point, was it?
No.
The point was teaching him that love can't be taken for granted, that relationships require effort, that actions have consequences that can't be undone with apologies. And has he learned those lessons? I thought about our conversation, about the genuine self-reflection I'd heard in his voice, about his choice to spend Christmas serving others rather than being served. I think he's learning them. Finally. But some lessons come too late to change the past. They can only change the future. And you're at peace with that? I looked around my dining room, still glowing with candlelight and filled with the lingering warmth of genuine celebration. I thought about the year that was ending, the year I'd discovered my own strength, reclaimed my own value, and built relationships based on mutual care rather than familial obligation. "I'm more than at peace with it," I said. "I'm grateful for it. Because the truth was, if David hadn't betrayed me on Christmas Eve, I might never have discovered how much joy was possible when you stopped trying to maintain relationships with people who didn't want them. I might never have learned the difference between being loved and being needed. I might never have found the courage to choose quality over quantity in my connections with others. His loss had become my liberation. And as I prepared for bed that Christmas Eve, surrounded by the evidence of an evening filled with genuine affection and mutual celebration, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, complete satisfaction with the life I'd chosen to live. This is what happens when you stop chasing people who don't want to be caught. You create space for people who genuinely want to be in your life. Have you ever discovered that ending one relationship opened the door to better ones? Share your story in the comments below. And if you're loving Leanne's journey of self-discovery, make sure to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear this message. We're almost to the end, and trust me, the conclusion will leave you feeling powerful. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it a sense of renewal that seemed to permeate every aspect of my life. My garden bloomed with unusual abundance, my investments performed better than expected, and my days filled with a kind of purposeful activity that comes from living according to your own values rather than others' expectations. I was reviewing quarterly financial statements in my study when Jonathan called with unexpected news. "Leanne, I thought you should know. David and Claire filed for divorce last week." I set down my pen, absorbing this information.
I see.
"Do you know the circumstances?" "From what I understand, it was amicable. Something about discovering they'd married for the wrong reasons and wanting to end things before they destroyed each other completely." How mature of them. Indeed. But there's something else you should know. What's that? David specifically requested that his attorney inform me that he's not seeking any claim to inheritance expectations in the divorce proceedings. He's explicitly stated that he has no legal right to your assets, and he doesn't want Claire to pursue any claims based on assumed future wealth. This surprised me. That's unusually responsible of him. I thought you'd find it interesting. It suggests his therapy is having some effect. It does indeed. After hanging up, I sat in my study thinking about endings and beginnings, about the courage it takes to admit that you've built your life on the wrong foundation and start over from scratch. Later that week, David called. Mom, I wanted you to hear it from me. Claire and I are getting divorced. Jonathan mentioned it. How are you feeling?
Sad. Relieved. Scared.
Hopeful. All at the same time. That sounds about right for a major life transition. We realized that we'd never actually been in love with each other. We'd been in love with the idea of each other, with what our marriage represented rather than who we actually were as individuals. What did it represent? Security. Status. The promise of an easy future built on other people's work. He paused. When we couldn't count on your inheritance anymore, we discovered we didn't actually have much in common. I'm sorry it didn't work out. I'm not. I'm sorry we wasted 3 years and hurt each other, but I'm not sorry that we're finally being honest about what our relationship actually was. And what was it? A business arrangement disguised as a romance. 2 people who were afraid of being alone making a deal to be alone together. This level of insight was remarkable for someone who had struggled so long with self-awareness. What happens now? Now I learn how to live as an adult who takes responsibility for his own life. Now I figure out what I actually want instead of what I think I'm supposed to want. Any initial thoughts? I want to keep working at the public interest firm. I want to finish therapy. I want to build relationships with people who actually know me rather than just my potential net worth. Those are good goals. I have one more goal, Mom, if you'll let me. What's that? I want to try to build a real relationship with you. Not the kind where I call when I need something or visit when it's expected, but the kind where I actually care about your life and want to be part of it. David, I know it won't change anything about the will. I know I can't undo the damage I've done or earn back what I threw away. But I'm hoping that maybe, if I work really hard at becoming someone worth knowing, you might be willing to let me try. Try what? Try being your son in ways that actually matter. Try caring about your health and your happiness and your interests without calculating what I might get in return. I found myself genuinely moved by his words, not because they suggested any change in his financial prospects, but because they suggested a fundamental shift in his understanding of what relationships could be. What would that look like? I don't know yet. Maybe calling you once a week just to see how you're doing. Maybe visiting because I enjoy your company rather than because it's a holiday. Maybe learning about your interests and your friends and your life instead of just waiting for my turn to talk about mine. And you want to do this, why? Because I realized something in therapy. I realized that I've never actually known my mother as a person. I've known you as a provider, as a safety net, as a source of approval and financial security. But I've never known you as Leanne Moriarty, the woman who built a business, who survived a devastating divorce, who created this beautiful life for herself. And you're curious about that woman? I'm desperate to know that woman. Because I think she might be someone I'd really like to have in my life, if I could figure out how to deserve her. We talked for another hour about what this new relationship might look like. No expectations, no guarantees, no promises beyond the commitment to try. David would work on becoming someone capable of genuine relationship. I would remain open to the possibility that such a person might emerge from the wreckage of his previous self. Mom, he said before hanging up, thank you for not giving up on me completely. Thank you for not giving up on yourself. even though it won't change anything financially? Especially because it won't change anything financially, because that means you're doing it for the right reasons. Over the following 18 months, David began what I privately called his relationship apprenticeship. The change wasn't dramatic or immediate. Real transformation never is. But it was steady, authentic, and ultimately convincing. He started therapy and stuck with it, even when the insights were uncomfortable. He began volunteering at a local literacy program, teaching adults to read without any fanfare or social media documentation. He called me every other week, not to discuss inheritance, but to check on my health and share details about his own growth. Most importantly, he stopped treating our conversations like negotiations and started treating them like genuine exchanges between two people who cared about each other. During this period, Claire had indeed filed for divorce, but the process was slower and more amicable than I'd initially heard. They spent nearly a year in counseling, both individual and couples therapy, trying to determine if their marriage could be rebuilt on a foundation of genuine compatibility rather than financial convenience. Ultimately, they concluded it couldn't be, but they parted with mutual respect and shared understanding of their mistakes. "Mom," David said during one of our monthly visits, now in his second year of therapy, "I want you to know that I'm not doing this work to change your mind about anything." "What are you doing it for?" "Because I realized I don't like who I was. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life being someone I don't respect." This level of insight was remarkable for someone who had struggled so long with self-awareness. How does it feel, becoming someone you respect? Harder than I thought it would be, but also more satisfying than I expected. By Christmas, exactly 2 years after the betrayal that had changed everything, David had become someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. He was still rebuilding his life, still learning how to form healthy relationships, still discovering what it meant to love people without keeping score. But the work was real, the progress was measurable, and the transformation was authentic. He spent Christmas Eve at my house, not for dinner, but helping me prepare for the celebration I was hosting for my chosen family. He arranged flowers, polished silver, and set the table without being asked, working alongside me with a kind of easy companionship I'd never imagined possible between us. "This feels different," he said as we put the finishing touches on the dining room. "What feels different?" "Being here. Helping you. Feeling like I'm contributing something rather than just waiting to receive something." "How do you like it?" "I like it better than I thought I would. It's more satisfying to give than I realize." As my guests arrived, the same group as the previous year, plus David's therapist, Dr. Martinez, whom I'd invited after learning about her work with homeless veterans, David helped serve dinner and participated in conversations without trying to dominate them. Watching him interact with my friends, seeing him listen to their stories and ask thoughtful questions, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: maternal pride that had nothing to do with achievements or status, and everything to do with character. He was becoming someone worth knowing. After everyone left, David helped me clean up, working in comfortable silence as we restored my house to order. "Mom," he said as he prepared to leave, "I have something I want to give you." He handed me a small wrapped package. Inside was a simple leather journal, beautifully bound but not expensive. "What's this for?" "For your thoughts, your memories, your experiences as Leanne Moriarty rather than as my mother. I realize that I've spent 35 years thinking of you only in relation to me, never as an individual with your own story worth preserving." "David, this is lovely. I want you to write about your life, your dreams, your accomplishments, your adventures. I want there to be a record of who you are as a person, not just as a parent." "And what will you do with this record?" "Nothing. It's for you, not for me. Your story belongs to you." As he left that night, I held the journal and thought about legacy, not the financial kind that had caused so much trouble, but the personal kind that really mattered. David would never inherit my money. But he was finally inheriting something more valuable: the knowledge of how to love without calculation, how to give without keeping score, how to build relationships based on genuine care rather than strategic advantage. That legacy was worth more than $12 million. And unlike money, it was something he could pass on to the people he would love in the future, the real love he was finally learning how to experience and express. 3 years later, I am sitting in my study on a crisp December morning, writing in the journal David gave me. My garden is dormant but peaceful, my house warm and welcoming, my life full of relationships that nourish rather than drain me. David has continued his growth, building a life based on his own values rather than inherited expectations. He volunteers regularly, maintains genuine friendships, and recently began dating a social worker who loves him for his kindness rather than his prospects. My will remains unchanged, but my son has been transformed. And in the end, that transformation was worth more than any inheritance I could have left him. Because money can be spent, but character lasts forever. Wealth can be squandered, but the ability to love and be loved is a gift that keeps giving across generations. The best revenge, I've learned, isn't fire or fury. It's refusing to let other people's poor choices define your worth. It's building a life so beautiful that their absence becomes irrelevant. It's discovering that you never needed their approval as much as they needed your resources. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's watching someone you love learn to become worthy of love themselves, not for what they can inherit, but for who they choose to become. That is a legacy worth leaving, with or without a penny attached. And that's the power of setting boundaries and sticking to them. Sometimes the people who lose your money find something far more valuable: themselves. Leanne didn't just protect her wealth. She transformed her relationships and taught everyone around her what genuine love actually looks like. If this story inspired you to think differently about your own boundaries, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Remember, your worth isn't measured by how much you're willing to give away. It's measured by how much you respect yourself enough to choose who deserves your time, energy, and love. Until next time, keep writing your own powerful story. And don't forget to check out Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain in the description, because sometimes the best revenge is living your best life.